Okay, so we are in book 1, We're Called to Life, and we're on chapter 2. So book 1, chapter 1, the period, just to sort of setting things up, we don't meet any characters, so it's in this chapter, chapter 2, that we meet characters for the very first time. So just follow along because we will skip around a little bit. So start on page 5 in my book. And so chapter 2 is called The Mail. It was the Dover Road that lay on a Friday night in November before the first of the persons with whom this history has business. The Dover Road lay, as to him, beyond the Dover Mail, as it lumbered up Shooter's Hill. He walked uphill in the mire by the side of the mail, as the rest of the passengers did, not because they had the least relish for walking exercise under the circumstances, but because the hill and the harness and the mud and the mail were all so heavy, and the horses had 3 times already come to a stop, besides once drawing the coach across the road, with the mutinous intent of taking it to Blackheath. Reins and whip and coachman and guard, however, in combination, had read the article of war which forbade a purpose otherwise strongly in favor of the argument, that some brute animals are endued with reason, and the team had capitulated and returned to their duty. With drooping heads and tremulous tails, they mashed their way through the thick mud, floundering and stumbling between whiles, as if they were falling to pieces at the larger joints. As often as the driver rested them and brought them to a stand with the wary "Whoa-ho, so-ho then," the near leader violently shook his head and everything upon it, like an unusually emphatic horse, denying that the coach could be got up the hill. Whenever the leader made this rattle, the passenger started, as a nervous passenger might, and was disturbed in mind. There was a steaming mist in all the hollows, and it had roamed in its forlornness up the hill. I always underline this part. Like an evil spirit, seeking, resting, and finding none, a clammy and intensely cold mist, it made its slow way through the air in ripples that visibly followed and overspread one another as the waves of an unwholesome sea might do. It was dense enough to shut out everything from the light of the coach lamps, but these, in its own workings, and a few yards of roads, and the reek of the laboring horses, steamed into it as if they made it at all. So it's November. Ooh, my lights went out. It's November, and it talks about how it's foggy, it's cold, and so that kind of is going to contribute to the mood and the mysterious tone of the book, especially at the start. So 2 other passengers beside the one were plodding up the hill by the side of the mail. All 3 were wrapped to the cheekbones and over the ears and wore jack boots. Not one of the 3 could have said from anything he saw what either of the other 2 was like, and each was hidden under almost as many wrappers from the eyes of the mind as from the eyes of the body of his 2 companions. In those days, travelers were very shy of being confidential on short notice. So here's this one of our main characters, and he's sitting next to 2 other people, but because they're so wrapped up, 1, because it's cold out, but 2, because they're sort of weary about traveling, and we'll find out why in a sec, they're all covered up, so you have no idea who the person sitting on either side of you is. As to the latter, for anybody on the road might be a robber or in league with robbers, so you just didn't trust people. We learned about highwaymen in the last chapter. As to the latter, with every posting house and alehouse could produce somebody in the captain's pay, ranging from the landlord to the lowest nondescript, it was the likeliest thing upon the cards. So the guard of the Dover Mail thought to himself that Friday night in November, 1775, so 1775, lumbering up Shooter's Hill as he stood on his own particular perch behind the mail, beating his feet and keeping an eye with a hand on the arm chest before him, where a loaded blunderbuss or gun lay at the top of the 6 or 8 loaded horse pistols deposited on the substratum of the cutlass. The Dover Mail was in its usual genial position, that the guard suspected the passengers, that the passengers suspected one another and the guard, they all suspected everybody else, and the coachman was sure of nothing but the horses, as to which cattle he could, with a clear conscience, have taken his oath on the 2 testaments that were not fit for the journey. "Whoa-ho," said the coachman, "so then, 1 more pull and you're at the top, and be damned for I have trouble getting to it." So they're trying to get up this hill, and so what happens is they have all the passengers get out so that they can get up the hill more easily. So I'm just jumping down as they go up the hill. So I'm going to jump over actually to page 8. The first real paragraph there, it says, "The passenger stood by this history," so this is one of our main characters here, "who was on the coach step getting in, and the 2 other passengers were close behind him and about to follow. He remained on the step, half in the coach and half out of it. They remained in the road below him. They all looked from the coachman to the guard, and from the guard to the coachman, and listened. The coachman looked back, and the guard looked back, and even the emphatic leader pricked up his ears and looked back without contradicting. The stillness consequent on the cessation of the rumbling and laboring of the coach added to the stillness of the night, and made it very quiet indeed. The panting of the horses communicated a tremulous motion to the coach, as if it were in a state of agitation. The hearts of the passengers beat loud enough perhaps to be heard, but at any rate the quiet pause was audibly expressive of people out of breath, and of holding breath, and of having the pulses quickened by the expectation. The sound of a horse at a gallop came fast and furiously up the hill. So all of a sudden, the lighting's weird. All of a sudden there is a horse that they hear riding up. And so obviously because they're worried about highwaymen, where they're worried about robbers, they're nervous about this. So ho, the guard sang out as loud as he could roar, "You there, stand, or I shall fire." The pace was suddenly checked, and with much splashing and floundering, a man's voice called from the mist, "Is that the Dover mail?" "Never you mind what it is," the guard retorted. "What are you? Is that the Dover mail?" "Why do you want to know?" "I want a passenger, if it is." "What passenger?" "Mr. Jarvis Lorry." Our booked passenger showed in a moment that it was his name. The guard, the coachman, and the other two passengers eyed him distrustfully. So this is the guy who we just talked about as the main character, who he's, out of the carriage, who had to walk up the hill. So his name is Jarvis Lorry, so that's really important to write down. The guard called to the voice in the mist, "Because if I should make a mistake, if it could never be set in your lifetime. Gentlemen of the name of Lorry, answer straight." "What is the matter?" asked the passenger then, with a mildly quavering speech. "Who wants me? Is it Jerry?" "I don't like Jerry's voice if it is Jerry," growled the guard to himself. "He's hoarser than suits me, is Jerry." "Yes, Mr. Lorry, what's the matter?" "A dispatch sent after you from over yonder, T & Co." So you should write down that T & Co is Tellson's Bank. That is a bank that is in London. And Jerry works for the bank, as does Jarvis Lorry. So we're going to find out more about that in a second. "I know this messenger guard," said Mr. Lorry, getting down into the road, assisted from behind more swiftly than politely by the other two passengers, who immediately scrambled into the coach, shut the door, and pulled up the window. "He may come close, there's nothing wrong." "I hope there ain't, but I can't make so nation sure of that," said the guard in a gruff soliloquy. "Hello, you." "Well, and hello, you," said Jerry more hoarsely than before. "Come on at a foot pace, do you mind me? And if you got your holsters in the saddle over yourn, don't let me see your hand go near them, for I'm a devil at a quick mistake, and when I make one, it's the form of lead. So now let's look at you." The figures of a horse and rider came slowly through the eddying mist. So this is adding to this mysterious tone that we've developed, that Dickens has developed. And came to the side of the mail where the passenger stood. The rider stooped, and casting up his eyes at the guard, handed the passenger a small folded paper. The rider's horse was blown, and both horse and rider were covered with mud from the hoofs of the horse to the hat of the man. "Guard," said the passenger in a tone of quiet business confidence. The watchful guard, with his right hand at the stock of his raised blunderbuss, his left at the barrel, and his eye on the horseman, answered curtly, "Sir, there is nothing to apprehend. I belong to Tellson's Bank. You must know Tellson's Bank in London. I am going to Paris on business, a crown to drink. I may read this?" "If so be as you're quick, sir." He opened it in the light of the coach lamp on the side, and read first to himself and then aloud, "Wait at Dover for Mademoiselle." "It is not long, you see, guard," Jerry said, that my answer was recalled to life. Jerry started in his saddle. "That's a blazing strange answer, too," said he in his hoarsest. "Take that back, and they will know that I received this as well as if I wrote. Make the best of your way. Good night." So, Jerry Cruncher is his name, you should write down. He is a messenger for Tellson's Bank. He does odd jobs, so whatever people need him to do, he does. Kind of a gruff guy, you can tell by, keeps talking about how his voice is hoarse. And so he delivers this message to Mr. Lorry, who is a banker at Tellson's Bank, and he's on his way to Paris. So he works in London, but he's heading over to Paris. And so from the bank, he gets the message that says, "Wait at Dover." Dover is on the tip of England, right before you head over to cross the English Channel and head to France. So wait at Dover for Mademoiselle. Mademoiselle is a girl. And in order to prove to the bank that Mr. Lorry received it, he sends back this secret message, which is recalled to life. And obviously that is familiar to us because we know that book the first is called Recalled to Life. So obviously this is an important idea that will be important for the rest of the book. So then what happens is Jerry he heads home, and as he heads home, he stops at different bars along the way. And so I'm just jumping over to page 11, right at the end of the chapter. It says, "After that there gallop from Temple Bar, old lady, I won't trust your forelegs till I get you on the level," said the horse messenger, glazing at his mare or horse. "We're called to life. That's a blazing strange message. Much of that wouldn't do for you, Jerry. I say, Jerry, you'd be in a blazing bad way if recalling to life was to come into fashion, Jerry." And we're not supposed to understand that, but you will understand that later. The idea is that Jerry, just as we, the reader, doesn't understand the message that he's bringing back, Jerry doesn't understand it. And so Jerry as a character kind of serves as this person for us he kind of matches our understanding throughout the book. So obviously there are other characters that are going to have more information than we have. Jerry kind of has the equivalent information to us. And so that's chapter 2.